Well, because I'm on the East Coast time, good afternoon, everybody. As Ian said, I've been with the university for 19 years. I'm the primary instructor for the WoodStore, IntelliStore, StoreTEQ. It's grown into these multiple names, but it's the same system. So it's the same software. So we'll go through some finer tips and tricks with the session today. So again, we're going to talk about WoodStore, the software that actually controls your inventory within the storage system. So first thing I want to talk about, and it's with some customers, it's a little bit of a gray area in how do we run the machine more efficiently and how do we store panels more efficiently. As you start looking at your statistical data over time, you may notice that your machine is actually spending a lot of time converting panels, uncovering, and restacking materials. So we'll talk about how we can start to minimize that. So again, we'll look at my demonstration software. You'll notice that I've got several different colors, different size panels. So those are all of the storage groups. We've got the in-feed stations. The demo software I use in the class has a barcoding table, number 61, and a saw, number 11. So we'll talk about the in-feed locations and getting material into the storage system today. So again, we'll talk about however many in-feed locations your system may have. You could have a very small system with just one or maybe even two in-feeds, but we have some very large systems out there that have multiple configurations. So we talk all the time about storage groups, and the group name is how we're going to control where the material can go. So if you look at my system right now, the blue areas are my 4x8 material, but they're all under one group with the exception of 125 and 126. We'll talk about how we're going to control those groups and how we are going to store material more efficiently, not necessarily smarter. So we hover around the board codes. So board codes can be as descriptive as you need. So this example, we know it's melamine material. It's two-sided white, and then it tells us thickness and then the size of the material. What it doesn't tell us necessarily is what is the core. That might be important. So you could add in that it's an MDF core, it's a plywood core. Again, you control what the board codes list. There are some specifications that you can't use certain special characters. It doesn't like dashes, it doesn't like backslashes. Underscores work great. We just use those as separators. So we all know about the board code library. So it lists all of our boards. Any of the green boards, we don't have any storage issues with them. We don't have any inventory issues. You'll notice that the yellow boards, the melamine two-side white, and the particle board 16 HPL, they've got an icon over here that's a 1, 2, 3, and that's flagging me that I've got an inventory issue. And then the melamine two-sided yellow has some issue with it and has an exclamation icon over here. I need to address that storage issue, and it probably is that it's conflicting with a storage location, group name, something like that. So let's talk about types. So once we have the board codes set up, we need to go into the properties for each panel and then tell it what type of storage are we going to use. So really these come down into three main types. The first one is actually called type. It's probably the most restrictive, but it can be a very useful tool if used properly. Again, we'll get a little bit deeper into each one and why we would do one storage type over another. The second one is by storing random, and this is probably the most used. It gives us the most flexibility, but it can also get us into a situation that our storage inventory 6 months to a year later, because we stored everything random, now it's just a jumbled mess. We've got 26 locations in there that are all rainbow stacks. And we have a really hard time finding that material efficiently, and the saw's waiting for material. So again, we can revisit how do we hold that material, how do we store that material more efficiently. The last one is dynamic. And dynamic can be a little difficult to understand, but hopefully when I get done with my explanations, it'll make a little more sense. So those are your three options. So let's talk about stored by type. So the stack is composed of a single board type. The example is white melamine. We go through a truckload of white melamine. It doesn't make any sense to store the white melamine in the storage system randomly. We'll designate one or two locations that are stored by type. Now, what you have to be careful of is the system, because we have white melamine, we might have 19mm boards, we may have 6mm boards. If we're not smart in how we use the type storage, it will let me put both the 19 and 6mm boards into a storage location. And if we have a single location, great. Now I've got a mix of boards, but now the system can't access the boards. It can't uncover because there's no place else for the boards to go. So when you use type, you have to be very, very specific. So a lot of times what we do is we'll designate a board code that is the white melamine, and then we'll be very specific in the group, and then we'll call the group white melamine 19, so that we know that only the 19mm boards can go in that location. Converting's not required because they're all one board. Therefore, the stack can hold up to 100% of its capacity. A normal system is about 2.50 meters in height. So again, we'll get into types and we'll talk about those. Really, it's used for frequently used boards. We just know we want 3 or 4 locations that are just going to be white melamine because we go through truckloads of the stuff every day. Why wait for it to go find the boards? So let's talk randomly. Some people refer to them as chaotic stacks. We prefer the term rainbow stacks, multiple board types, thicknesses, but again, it still has to fall into the length and width requirements. But it has a requirement. You have to have at least 2 locations that are going to be in this group. Because we're storing multiple board codes in this stack, I need to be able to uncover. So if you only have one stack that is 4x8 veneer, and we put multiple veneer panels in there, my system cannot uncover, and you're just going to get error messages, and the system's going to just have a real fit with this. So you have to have at least 2 locations, and then the percentages work out. So if you think about it, you have 2 locations. One location's 50% full. The next location next to it can only be 49.9% full because I have to be able to uncover one stack to get to the bottom panel. So as you create multiple stack locations, these percentage numbers work with each other. So at no point can you have both stacks at 100%. Doesn't make sense. We can't uncover, we can't convert those panels. We do this for maybe less common boards. Maybe we'll do it within a family. So we have a bunch of melamine sheets that are specifically in colors. So we may want to randomly store those in specific locations. We'll talk about that. So the last one's dynamic. It really is a combination of type and random. So you'll list 3 or 4 locations that are a specific group. You'll list the panels that want to be stored in that group, and you'll tell them to store dynamically. What happens is when the system moves a board into a location, that first board in there designates what is in that location. So it's become a type storage. But once that location becomes empty, it's now free to be another board. So again, dynamic serves a purpose. Again, we'll get into and we'll demonstrate a little bit more about the dynamic storage. Again, different applications as to why you would pick one storage over another. So here's an illustration. So in the first option, we store by type. It's one board. It's 19mm 2-sided white melamine. That's all that goes there. I don't need to worry about converting. I don't have to uncover. I can just pull material from that stack. Therefore, it can be 100% full. If you look at the second option, the random, this is where I was talking about the percentages. So we've got one stack that's 50% full. The other stack's only going to be able to be filled to about 49%. Again, I have to be able to move that second stack to the left to get to the last board in that stack. So at no point can I overfill these. And then the third option was dynamic. So again, we place the left hand panel with a red board. That location is now designated for those red panels. It does give us a little more flexibility, but again, you have to understand what it's doing within the system. So the second part of what I'll demonstrate is doing a prior removal, or what some people refer to as pre-stacking. So we do a tremendous number of production lists that are just a rainbow stack of material. Now you have one option. You just tell your sawyer to start the production list, and then he waits for the crane to uncover the next panel that's in the list. You have to remember that a typical lift from one stack to another stack could be anywhere from 30 to 45 seconds. So one way to get around this is, even during the day, we can start a prior removal. And what the crane will do is it will pre-stack the material in the order that we need to process through the saws. Or we can do this lights out. At the end of the day, we've got 1 or 2 prior removal stacks to be processed. We tell it to process the prior removals, and then everybody goes home. So while we're asleep, the system lights out is pre-stacking the material. Your sawyer comes in the morning, he pulls up the production list, and he just hits go. So we'll talk about prior removals on how we can do that. You'll notice in my location, again, we talked about the saw being number 11. The bar coding table is number 61. Below that, I have 2 locations that are shaded. Anytime you see shaded colors, they're not associated with a specific group. The numbers 22 through 40 are designated by the WoodStore software as prior removal locations. So again, we're going to pre-stack that material. I do pre-stacking so often that I just designated 2 locations, and those are always going to be my prior removals. But if you just do them occasionally, you can right-click on any of these locations, providing it's big enough to hold the material that's going in the prior removal list. You can right-click on it and immediately designate that as a prior removal. It's not a big deal. So one thing we do with the prior removal list is we get a production list sent down from the design department. So for my demonstration today, I'm going to create a production list by hand. I'm not connected to a design department. I don't have cut-rate set up. So in this case, this is my prior removal stack, and this is my production list. And you'll notice that I've got blue panels, green, I've got white panels, and then some red. Okay, so you have one option. You can create the prior removal list by hand. We're all human, so we make mistakes. So you might put them in the wrong order, you might omit a board. So there's an easy way around this. From the production list, we can turn around and tell the program to create a prior removal list for us. Now you'll notice in this production list, I've got a problem. So these icons that are over here, the 1, 2, 3, are indicating that I can run this production list, but when I get to the white panels, I have insufficient material. The production list is going to stop unless I fix this problem. Well, my sawyer can still start the production list as long as I've got the fork truck driver bringing white material over. As soon as he puts it to the infeed and tells the software that material is on the infeed, the crane will pull from the infeed. So I don't have to waste time picking the material up, storing it in the storage, just so I can get through this list. So there's no reason to panic, but you're going to have to fix this problem. So again, we talked about this. I can go from the production list, F4. I then click F2 to the editor. And in the editor, I have an option to generate a prior removal list. So it'll take that list of material in the production list and create a prior removal. Now you'll notice in my prior removal list, the red panels are first in the prior removal so that they will be last on the prior removal stack. So it flips the order of panels in the prior removal list so that they're in the correct order in the prior removal location. You'll also notice that the white material is not in my prior removal. Doesn't need to be. Because we're storing our material by type, we have 2 or 3 stacks of white melamine that's just sitting there ready to go. So the prior removal list has been told that we can't do that. And we'll talk about how we set up those board codes. So again, we go back into production, go to editor, tell it to generate the prior removal list. And then the last function is pre-stacking. So the pre-stacking is the go button. So once your prior removal list is created, you've got a prior removal location identified, we just hit pre-stacking and the machine will then pre-stack that material. Okay, so let's go look at a little bit of live WoodStore demonstration. So here's my storage system. You'll notice that 101 through 132 are all the same color, which means that they're 4x8 material. So I could go into my system right now and just start loading material. It's not going to take a WoodStore expert to figure out 6 to 8 months from now, this thing is going to be a mess. We're going to have just a myriad of rainbow stacks. And if we go over to F6 and we pull up our statistics, we can look and 90% of our time is going to be spent restacking. So let's talk about storing by type. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to designate 131 and 132 as a specific group for my 19mm white materials. So we double click. Now again, there isn't a list of board codes, so you can create virtually whatever you want. So this will be white underscore MDF 19. Let me keep it all the same. So we'll save that. So you'll notice it changed colors. I can right click and I can designate that color. Try to stay away from the dark colors. We can't change the number indicator in here. So the dark colors will kind of hide the identification numbers. So in 132, I also need to store that as white MDF 19. So I've got the storage location groups. Now I go to my master data. We're going to pull up the white 19mm material. Now, rather than telling it to store randomly, we're going to store by type. And I want to make sure that this box is unchecked. Prior removal of panel storage. What this does is it gives the system permission to put that panel in a prior removal. Well, I don't want to do that. So I take that permission away. So we go to automatic group. Now we tell it we're going to put those in white MDF 19. So you'll notice the icon changed. So now we have these green bars. So that tells me that material is stored by type. When I click on this, the storage permission is only allowed to go into 131 and 132. So if I go to my locate in feed number 3, I'm going to put 20 sheets of white melamine into the system. So back to main storage. We'll go look at the 3-dimensional view, and then we'll tell it to infeed to storage. So because of where they can be stored, now those 2 stacks are only 19mm white melamine. I don't worry about uncovering. So again, it's a very good, useful reason for using storage by type. We just don't use storage by type very often because it can get us into trouble if we're not doing it correctly. So within my board code library, I have 3 different types of veneer plywood. So I want to go and change 125, 126, and 127 to just be veneer material. So I'm going to change the group. So again, we double click, come up to our board list, our group list, and we'll just call it veneer. So again, it changes the colors. All right, so now I have 3 locations that are just going to hold veneer material. This might be a good point to use dynamic. So 3 different veneers. So as I load the veneer material, red oak's going to go in one location, cherry is going to go another location, Honduran mahogany is going to go into another location, excuse me, until I empty a location. And then it becomes free for any other veneer material that I may put in there under that group. So again, we go back to master data. We'll go into the cherry panels. We'll change the automatic group. We'll go into properties and we'll tell it to store dynamically. And we want to make sure that that material can go into a prior removal stack. So we have to do the same thing for Honduran. So store dynamically, it's still in a prior removal. Change the automatic group. And then we do the same thing for red oak. All right. Oh, you can notice that the icon changed. So now this is the icon for dynamic storage. And you'll notice that it says that these panels can go in 125, 126, and 127. So in feed 1, we have 10 panels of cherry. In feed number 2, we'll put the Honduran mahogany in here. And red oak in the last in feed. So again, when we use in feed to storage, we turn this over to the computer. So the computer is going to figure out based upon groups, storage types. So now 3 different veneer materials, and we tell it to in feed to storage. So notice that it's taking the red oak material and it's going to the first location and it's going to stack all 10 boards in there. Then it goes over to location number 1. It's going to pull the cherry material, put that in the second storage, and then we'll pull the Honduran mahogany and put it in the third. This is just a good example of why we may choose to use dynamic storage. All right, so let's talk random. So we still have a number of locations in here that are just random storage, and we've got a tremendous number of colors that we use. So if we just start loading the color material in here, very quickly, we're going to start shuffling the material. So it's a good reason to store randomly, but we can also do something to help the random storage. So one option is if we go to our material that has colors, let's go to the blue material. So we're going to go into properties. And what we're going to do is it's in a prior removal permission. We're going to store it randomly, but I have the ability to give it a ranking number. So the lower the number, the higher percentage of use of those panels. So we can just give this a designation of 100. Now I need to make sure I designate it 4x8. So we'll save that. Now the blue, green, and red are the ones we use the most. So we go into properties, we're going to give those all the same ranking number. So how does this ranking number apply? So if I right click on my storage system, I can go into display position evaluation. Right now, they're all designated as 0, which means that in the random storage, everything's open. So I need to change these. So I'm going to double click, go into position graphic, and then using the batch processing, I'm going to select these 6 locations. Go back into multiple processing, go into define position evaluation until those are 100. So we'll exit. Now when you look at your evaluations, these are all 100. That means that that is the location that the red, green, and blue boards are going to be stored randomly. So let's see if it works. So we'll put the blue panels on location 3. Again, we'll put 10 into each. So the green panels will go next. And last is the red. Okay, so let's go back to in-feed to storage. So watch what the system does. You'll notice that it's putting the green panels in, but they're only going in those locations. So it's going to load the green, then the blue. So we have random stacks. We're okay with that. But we're limiting the amount of rainbow colors we can have within that. And hopefully it will start limiting the amount of uncovering operations we have in the system. So the last thing I want to do is I have purple, orange, and yellow panels that have to go in the system. I'm not going to do anything special to those. I just want to demonstrate what happens in the random storage if we don't give it the designations. Now, if I go into properties, all these panels can go into prior movals, but they have no ranking numbers and they are stored randomly. Still in the 4x8. So we go to purple, does the exact same thing, and then we'll go to the yellow. Okay, so again, we'll load 3 different panel materials. So we'll go to the purple. So we want 10 of these. We'll load the orange panels into number 2. And location 1 will have the yellow panels. Cool, back to our 3D view. So we can see the color materials. Those can be assigned to anyone. You can import images, you can import photographs. So now we're going to go in-feed to storage. Now watch what the system does. Because it is going to load all the yellow material first and it's going to utilize everything that it can. Nothing wrong with that. We just have to understand that those are the lesser boards that we use, but we're going to have to spend time finding these panels. So it could be that we have problems. Maybe we need 3 or 4 stacks just for plastic materials. Any myriad of issues that we have. So that's the difference between storing by type, storing randomly. Again, use evaluation numbers. So if we know that we want a random storage, but we use those numbers, those panels quite often, we'll give it a lower ranking number. I could have done the same thing with the purple, orange, and yellow boards. I could have given them a different ranking number, 200, just because I don't use those as often. But again, I could store randomly, but designate just these 4 or 5 locations. So let's talk about a prior removal list. So we'll right click. I'm going to go back to position evaluation. So now we go into production list. So again, normally I would have a production list sent down from the design department. So I'm going to create a list here. So I double click, tell it I want the blue panels. You have to give it a run and a pattern number. And I'm just going to complete that and tell it I need 2 panels of the blue. And then we'll do 2 panels of white. Again, keeping all of the job numbers the same. So we're doing 2 panels of each. So again, we'll go in and we'll pick the green. Then we'll do 2 more white. And we'll throw a couple of veneer panels in. So we'll do some cherry. A couple more white. So again, the true meaning of a rainbow stack. This thing is just a myriad of panel materials. All right, last thing, we'll put a couple sheets of red oak in here. So here's my whole production list. So now I can click here. I can go into Editor, select Generate Prior Removal List. So it tells me it created a prior removal list with 8 jobs in it. Now I can also copy this, paste it up here. And the reason I did that is that I want to keep this production list. We're going to do this for the next couple of days. So rather than clicking, dragging up, and then dragging it back down, I'll just make a copy of it and put it at the top. So we're still not ready to run the production list. I could, but we have to understand we're going to do this uncovering. So now what I do is I go look at my prior removal list. Notice it has the red oak boards, the cherry, the green, the blue, but there aren't any white panels in here. We don't need to. We stored those by type. Now we click here, pre-stacking. So the crane is going to pre-stack that material into location 22. So now we're doing the uncovering operation. So it gained access to the boards. So now my prior removal list is created. So I can go back up, go remove to storage, remove from storage, and this will simulate running the production list. So now we're pulling the panels from the pre-stack, we're pulling them from the white material. Again, a very efficient way of running this system. Just takes a little bit of pre-thought. And again, you may start looking at how we're storing panels. Are we storing by type mostly? Are we storing randomly? And our system's just a mess. It's not that difficult to change the mindset, but hopefully that'll give you some thought as to how we can do things better. How do we do, Ian?
Wonderful, Phil. Thank you for explaining. I will open up now to questions from anyone. I do want to keep you sharing, Phil, in case any questions require us to show any more demonstration there.
Absolutely.
To all of our attendees, use your Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to submit questions directly to Phil. And while giving them some time, Phil, I do have one question for you, if you don't mind elaborating on one piece.
Sure.
When you were exploring the dynamic storage in your demonstration, and you selected those 6 locations, 123, 124, 115, 116, and 107, 108.
Yes.
You selected those and you gave them a priority of 100, making them effectively top priority. Why would someone choose those locations specifically? Is it a distance to the infeed, or excuse me, distance to the prior removal stack? Why would you select those locations specifically?
Well, I picked them because it puts my more common color panels that I use closest to the machine.
Mm-hmm.
So if I knew that this material, let's say my system had a saw and a CNC, but the CNC was over here in the right corner, I may turn around and pick a different location for these panels, because 90% of the time these panels go through the CNC.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you're looking at what's the timeline between picking and weighing and dropping a panel, 30 to 45 seconds virtually anywhere in the system. But if I'm storing all these commonly used panels over here in the corner, I have much more lead time trying to get to the saw.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I could look at this, I could monitor this within the next 4 or 5 months and go, yeah, that wasn't a good move. It's not difficult to move things around. But again, if you're running your system and your capacity is way up there in the 75, 80%, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time to rethink the system.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help?
Yeah, thanks. And just on average, how much time do you think customers who use the pre-stacking options save when they can have their machines running overnight, or versus not using that? Have you seen some consistent numbers coming back there?
Well, I don't have numbers, but it's huge.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If you look at a production run that would have, let's say, 35 to 40 panels in there, and they're in 8 different board codes, we may spend 45 minutes to an hour just
Mm-hmm.
waiting for the crane to uncover material. And again, you don't have to designate a location. I don't have to pick this one. So I can go in at any time and I can right click here until it switched that to a prior removal. It'll ask me what number do I want to apply to it. And that's now a prior removal. What you have to remember though is once I do this, I lose access to the boards underneath this. So this location at 406 was not empty. I just lost access because I've now stacked material on top of that in a prior removal. But again, once my job's done, right click, switch back as a storage position, and I'm back to normal operation.
Great.
Look at that, no questions. That's amazing.
You must have just done it perfectly, Phil.
I think so. Whoa, there we go. Can you use
an
an INFEED as a prior removal stack? Absolutely. So again, let me demonstrate on this. If I come down to location number 2, right click, and I can switch that as a prior removal. Now I can't infeed material there, but this would be a good time to pre-stack material in the correct order because I have a CNC or a saw that's not connected to the IntelliStore or the StoreTEQ. So now I'm going to move that material to a different machine. Maybe it's in a different building. So I need to control this inventory, but now my fork truck driver takes that stack, and once he removes it from the software, those boards are no longer in inventory and they're heading down to the off-system machine. So again, just right click, switch that back to an INFEED, and we're ready to run.
Thanks for that question, Tyler. Anyone else? You've got a last call for some questions for Phil. Again, anything related to WoodStore in general, specifically within our storage types or prior removals that we discussed today. And Phil, how would you classify this subject? Is this a basic piece of WoodStore programming, or would this be more intermediate or advanced level that we did today?
I would say it's basic in understanding, because the typical flow is that when a customer is going to be receiving an IntelliStore or a StoreTEQ system, then they come to our class prior to us commissioning your machine. So we're already starting to think about groups and board codes and what's the best way to access this material. But again, as the system evolves, maybe we need to do a refresher. And again, that's why I set up some of the classes in the Styles University Online that specifically to address these issues that we may have actually forgotten some of the tools that are available.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, Phil. Thank you again for presenting for us today. We appreciate it. If any of those of you who are attending right now have any additional questions or anything specific to your particular system, you can email Phil. Phil, I'm going to pull back